Ja, god kväll. Det är torsdag den 16 november och idag är inte vilken dag som helst utan det är jag i två vyer. Nej, men idag så har vi ju gäster med oss. Nämligen XBT Provider eller Coinshares som de också heter. Så vi ska prata lite Bitcoin i början och sen kommer vi prata vanligt aktier och fonder och sådana grejer. Så jag kommer att byta skärm nu och hoppas att min teknik fungerar. Ska vi se, case 2, ska vi se ifall det funkar här. Trycka på en knapp så hoppas vi att det funkar. There we go! Hello guys!
Hello!
Hi! So we're gonna switch over to English now in the chat. I hope it's okay for everyone. And welcome Townsend and James.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really happy to have you. So, well, maybe you can start with introducing yourselves. Let's start with Townsend.
Sure. So my name is Townsend Lansing. I am head of product, responsible for development of all the financial products in the asset management division of Coinshares, which includes XBT and other exchange traded product issuers that we have. I've been in essentially financial products, listed products for over 15 years, starting my career actually as a lawyer for a U.S. law firm, and then did structured products for a few years for a large U.S. bank, and then I've been in the ETF, ETP business since 2008. So.
Nice. So James.
Yes, I'm head of research at Coinshares. I've been in finance for 24 years now. I think mainly TradFi the last 4 years in the crypto industry. Used to mine Ethereum many years ago, and that's how I got into it and understood it better. Used to write research on gold and commodities and be a fund manager at some point. And yeah, really compelled by the crypto industry and very much driven by kind of thinking deeply about crypto assets and how they're positioned in the world and how they should be valued.
Awesome. So if anyone has any questions regarding pricing of Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on, it's James getting those answers, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Keen to take on those. Yeah, ask me any question, and I'm game for a bit of fun.
Yeah, Townsend, I'm happy for you to speculate as well, but I don't know if the rules and laws are against that.
It won't be as well educated or informed as James's speculation.
Cool. So guys in the chat, feel free to ask any questions. So I think now we're gonna do like a short overview of what you're actually doing for those guys watching the stream who doesn't know. So let me switch over to my screen share. And I think I'm showing the right products and you can see them. So you're from Coinshares, right? And you have certificates, which is products which you can invest in, and then that gives you exposure to the pricing of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we have, as I was saying, we're primarily an issuer of exchange-traded products. We have, as an asset management group, we have two issuers. One is XBT in Sweden, and one is, as you see here, Coinshares Physical, which is also approved in Sweden, but primarily listed actually in Germany and Switzerland. Both of these products provide exposure to digital assets. XBT obviously is the longest standing product, one that was first launched in 2015 by a Swedish Bitcoin miner that we acquired shortly thereafter when they got into a bit of difficulty. And then, as the market developed and the rules started to crystallize around what was permissible and what was necessary to list further afield, Switzerland opened up some about 3 years after Sweden, as did Germany about 4 years. We also launched a new issuer to address those particular rules. So, we are the largest provider between XBT and Coinshares Physical in Europe, with around, depending on the given price of Bitcoin, I think around $4 billion of AUM invested in our listed products.
Awesome. And one of the questions, so I have some pre-made questions to get the chat going, right? And I mean, I think most of the people watching is like, or most of the crypto fanboys are like, why would you buy like Bitcoin XBT in Sweden and not just crypto itself?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, I spent a lot of years buying or building gold products, for example, and fundamentally an ETF or an ETP is always an access tool. It allows investors to buy both traditional and, for example, alternative assets in a wrapper that it fits more within the traditional finance space. So I think, as I used to say with gold, there are a number of ways to access digital assets. There are a number of people with different traditions as well as comfort levels in terms of technology and providers. But fantastic new innovations across the board in digital assets. But the reality is, in terms of investable assets and money, the vast bulk of money being invested today still remains in traditional finance. And I think what we're looking to do is target investors who are focused on traditional finance, want to access digital assets through traditional finance wrappers, like an ETP. They can do that, for example, through a normal broker that they hold their other securities in, and so on, without needing to necessarily open up accounts or work with non or unregulated providers. Now, I mean, there are plenty of ways to get access to digital assets. Obviously, you can go the unregulated route, both spot and digital. That has had some problems. We all know about FTX. Of course, you can go through CME futures, but then you're paying, to some extent, a roll cost on the futures. But for investors, who in particular are used to or accustomed to buying via broker in traditional securities markets, our products are very, very appropriate. And sorry, appropriate is the wrong word. Are attuned to their needs. Clearly recognize the crypto community is marching in a different direction to some extent, but we're trying to combine the two, trying to act as a bridge between what they're offering and what a lot of traditional investors want to see in terms of how they get the exposure and how they access the underlying.
Cool. And yeah, I think the biggest pro for us Swedes, at least, is that we have that ISK account, ISK-konto. So we don't have to pay very high taxes on it, and we don't have to declare the transactions and so on. I think that's the biggest pro, I guess. And
I think that's right. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No,
I think that's right. I think one of the benefits of traditional, I keep saying TradFi, of wrappers like the one we use, is that they fit also within the traditional tax regimes that have for years encouraged investment by giving, for example, pensions or other retirement funds or other types of investment vehicles tax preferences. And of course, those are all built on the back of investing in traditional securities as opposed to alternative assets directly. For example, had the same issue with gold for the longest time in places like the UK. You can't put gold in your pension, physical gold, but you can put our product. The same with these ETPs. You can put them directly in your pension. You can get the tax benefits or other tax preferred accounts that are focused on allowing securities to accumulate in a tax preferred manner.
Yeah, I agree. So let's have a question from the chat to diversify our discussions here. Yeah. I saw two questions about Ethereum. So there's one guy called Osco. He says, Ethereum, I bought one a week ago and it's already up 15%. And some other guy asking about, what do you think? Yeah, Osco said the same. What do you think about Ethereum? And I recognize this question a lot, like especially when crypto goes up, as we've seen now this year. Both Bitcoin and Ethereum are up. And I think most people want to find like the next Bitcoin kind of, and they aim towards Ethereum. But let's throw it to James. What do you say?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad there's some interest in Ethereum. Actually, Ethereum suffered from negative sentiment this year. If you look at the amount of money flowing into Bitcoin exchange traded, into Ethereum exchange traded products, it's been very low relative to Bitcoin. So people have very much favored Bitcoin. I actually think investors are starting to get more intelligent and think a lot more about the differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Bitcoin is very much this emerging store of value, a bit like a digital e-gold with this kind of growth component to it, while Ethereum is actually much more like a tech stock, much more like Amazon Web Services, but with a currency rolled into it. And it has the very interesting feature now of offering a yield of around 4%. They call it staking. It's essentially a yield, a bit like a dividend yield. And I think that's a really attractive feature of Ethereum. And importantly, the way most cryptocurrencies deliver a yield is through printing more of their own cryptocurrency. So in a way, it's a bit like you're being diluted as a shareholder. So Ethereum's created this mechanism, this burn mechanism, which means in essence the net issuance is slightly negative or neutral. So it's quite a good structure. It has, and I think this is part of the reason why it's suffered from negative sentiment in recent years, various what we call software upgrades, like what they call the merge, where it moved from mining, proof of work, that is, to proof of stake, where it doesn't mine. It becomes ESG much more friendly. It uses 99% less energy. And much less than Visa now, for instance, and yet it has comparable transactions per second. And it has various upgrades that are coming in the future that I suppose some people are a little bit worried about, but ultimately I think Ethereum's track record is quite good in terms of implementing sort of software upgrades. So I think the future, like Bitcoin for Ethereum, looks quite positive.
Yeah, and you also got like another question there from Isak Krantz. He asks, do you have a staking basket certificate? I don't know what staking basket is, but I guess it's like a certificate for staking.
So in the physical range, which obviously is we have an index product that involves staking. In the XBT range, we don't. We are constantly monitoring the market and potentially considering how we can bring more XBT products to market. But in our physical range, we do have a staking index product. Yes.
Is this physical Ethereum staked or no?
Not yet, no. So we're in the process of making sure we can dot all the I's and cross all the T's to do that. As you know, with Ethereum and the staking protocol, it's so we do have we have 7 different products in that range that stake and offer at 0% at 0% management fee, and then also offer staking rewards. We have reduced the Ethereum product to 0% in the physical, and we're working on staking, but it's taking some time as the protocol develops and as we get comfortable that we can do that in a way to make sure that we minimize the risks and maximize the benefits for investors.
I see. I still like though that you have some of that you get some staking rewards, right? Because otherwise you might feel, as a customer, you might feel fooled because you know that I can buy the cryptocurrency myself and stake it. But then if I buy it through a certificate, I know that they can stake it and then take the returns themselves. So I'm getting not scammed, but you know what I mean, you know? So I appreciate that as a customer, at least. We got another question kind of aligned with my prepared questions. What makes your product safe and risks? So let's start with the safety of the product.
So, I mean, I think, first and foremost, obviously, we're responsible for the product and we're responsible for building a product that's safe. And I think there are a number of mechanisms, that we do. So we obviously, my experience, I've been in the business for over 15 years, as well as, we also have the benefit of being within a regulatory regime like the prospectus directive, which means the prospectus goes into the Swedish regulators, is reviewed and approved. We have to comply with MiFID. So there's a lot of the regulatory regime in a traditional securities vehicle, or effective traditional securities, that also underpins the product that we offer. So what we try to do is we try to structure the product such that we minimize the risks and really allow investors to focus on the fundamental thing they want, which is market risk. And so in many ways in the XBT range, we've done that primarily by XBT gets its exposure in what's called a synthetic fashion, which is it doesn't directly hold the crypto. It contracts with an affiliate. This was the legacy of the way it was built. It's something, unfortunately, we cannot change given the nature of the securities when we bought them. There doesn't allow for material changes. But underpinning that, we have what's called a collateral management agreement with the affiliate, such that they have very clear principles as to what they have to hold, and that is 75% physical and up to 25% derivatives. That is mainly for the liquidity purposes of managing the exposure. But if you look at, and we publish our through Ledger Lens, exactly, we publish our reserves daily, so an investor can see, and we're often over collateralized. In fact, if you calculate what we ultimately owe the investor on the securities, we hold a tremendous, far more assets relative to that. So I think there are a lot of metrics there that make this product, what we believe, safer than what you find in traditional crypto investment, and as safe as other products out there. Making sure investors understand what we hold, how much we hold, what the exposure looks like, exactly what the Bitcoin versus the actual net asset value that we owe investors, and that we have an overhedge is very, very important. We want investors to see that we have sufficient assets to cover the liabilities. I remind this product has been around since 2015. We've been managing it since 2017. It has gone through a number of the issues, both up and down in the digital asset market, and we're still standing strong. We're still providing quality exposure to investors, and we're still very confident that the vehicle we use and the processes we have in place around the assets, and the fact that we're within the prospectus directive and also subject to MiFID, make this a product well worth investing in.
Cool. Some quick questions and answer. Eric asked, what times can you buy Bitcoin and Ethereum on Avanza? Is it possible only during stock market times, and why not 24/7?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality of the markets. The traditional stock markets haven't caught up to the crypto in terms of 24/7 trading. Obviously, Avanza will only itself also offer trading, as will the market makers. They still trade within traditional hours. It is one of the sort of quote disadvantages of being in a traditional securities wrapper, is that you're still subject to some of the older modes of trading, which include market hours. And so Avanza, as well as the exchange, as well as all the infrastructure that goes around allowing the trades to happen, is still subject to those market hours. So, whereas obviously digital assets can trade on, pretty much in the ether, using that word, in the cloud, 24/7, traditional securities still have opening and closing hours.
Yeah, I see. There's a guy. Are you confident to speak about your competitors?
I mean, I don't. I'm happy to answer questions. I don't like to publicly criticize them. I think, but if there's a question about how we might, other companies, yeah, I think, in terms of what we think of as our USP is very much our experience, our longevity in the market, the expertise we have, in terms of zero certificates. I mean, that is not something that we're currently contemplating outside of products that might offer staking, which we are looking at through XBT. The reality is we don't believe it's in the benefit of an investor to not earn a management fee, but somehow earn it in a different fashion. We want to be as transparent as possible as around our products, what they cost and what investors are going to pay. I think, it's important to remember that one of the biggest things that, when you look at other certificates, is the liquidity and the depth of that order book.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, oh, it doesn't cost me anything, but if you're paying 1% to 2% just to make a trade, that's a cost, right? It's a cost you pay on the way in and the way out.
Most people, they look at the fees, but they don't realize like how much fees are actually in the spread as well. So because when I've looked at your product, Bitcoin XBT is like the Bitcoin certificate that I've seen. I might be wrong on this one, but like that has the highest liquidity. And And that's a very important factor, which like beginners might not realize. They just look at the admin fee and they see like 2% or
Definitely.
0%. And they pick the 0%. But then also, like as I'm showing here, the spread is very important to look at when you're trading as well.
Yes, I mean, you have to calculate the spread, and illiquid products will trade with wide spreads at the wrong times, and if you're not paying attention, it can more or less be like a de facto fee. We think of longevity with the AUM we have, which is by far the largest in the market. We have by far a superior product.
Yeah. Okay, what else do we have? We want to get James in as well. I mean,
I've seen a few questions that I quite like to answer. There's a couple
let me know someone.
Theme. So there's one around yes, what's the scamming and money laundering like in crypto, and what are the biggest problems with crypto, and
the ones from Isaac.
Currencies used for illegal purposes, and can this affect Bitcoin's future? And I think it's really important to tackle this point. The first thing to understand is that Bitcoin specifically is a public ledger, and therefore every kind of any action or trade that is executed on Bitcoin is recorded on the public ledger forever. And there have been some quite high profile cases of exchanges being hacked, and at some point they have been caught years down the line. In fact, the FBI eventually caught the hackers of an exchange and had the largest ever financial haul or recovery of assets of $3.6 billion. And actually Hamas more recently is a really good example where the Israelis have been tracking Hamas wallet activities using a Bitcoin forensics company called Elliptic for many years now. And in fact, it got to the point where Hamas realized that it was they actually had an internal memo saying don't use cryptocurrencies to fund our organization because it can be tracked. And there has been a lot of misinformation actually recently in the press about the level of criminal activity and funding terrorist financing. And in fact, it's much, much smaller than people realize. So a more recent transaction size from Mass for cryptocurrencies was $2,000. So, and to put things in perspective, when you look at something like money laundering, we look at the criminal activity in Bitcoin, which they can measure quite accurately using forensics companies. It's about $22 billion in 2022. That equates to around 0.6% of all global money laundering. So I think other currencies have a lot more to answer for in terms of criminal activity than something like Bitcoin does. I mean, there are other cryptocurrencies you can use that are completely anonymous, like Monero and Zcash. It's just the market caps and the liquidities of those are incredibly small, and so are not really used. And importantly, a criminal could trade Bitcoin if it stayed within the Bitcoin ecosystem. It could quite happily trade it, but at some point it needs to be converted to a fiat currency of some sort, and that's most of them get caught. They use what we would call the on and the off ramps, the exchanges, and they get caught at that point. And don't forget, if you ever thought it might be a good idea to do some criminal activity on Bitcoin, it will be recorded forever. And so what we're finding is actually criminal activity remains remarkably low, and quite contrary to a lot of the media sort of comments you hear.
Right. So regarding the products, we got two questions. One from Eric. Is there any other cryptocurrencies you're planning to add in the future? And the email, if you will open up for more crypto such as XRP and more.
Sure, Eric and Emil. I mean, we without making promises and obviously subject to all the regulatory approvals, we are definitely, now that we've built out what I would say are more continental European product range, in order to ensure that we could stay lockstep with some of the developments in Germany and Switzerland, we're turning back in many ways to Sweden and we will be looking to expand the range. And I think the goal, without saying exactly which ones, would be to have a very similar range to what we have in physical in XBT and therefore available on Avanza. So that would include, you can see the list below, expanding in that direction, also hopefully offering staking and other aspects in a very similar fashion on XBT. So, and in many ways, I mean, just to be about our business strategy, I mean, XBT, obviously incumbent product, fantastic, but the market was moving away from Sweden, even though it had first mover advantage and tremendous investor interest, to kind of the continent, in particular Germany and Switzerland. And so we had to position, and so we've done over the last 2 or 3 years to make sure we were competitive in that space. And now that we've done that, and we're one of the largest, one of the largest providers overall, and also in that area, we're turning our attention back to Sweden in many ways to build out that XBT range. So I think it's going to be exciting. I think look out, subject to regulatory approval, for something in the next 3 to 6 months, depending on timing with the SFSA and Nasdaq. But we're definitely turning back to Sweden. It's our home jurisdiction. We have a lot of connectivity there, a lot of history there, and so we ourselves as a company are listed. The group company is listed there, so it's definitely the area we want to focus on again, and we will coming back in the market with new products.
Cool. So let's switch over with a speculating question. Robert Leal asked price prediction on Bitcoin in 2024 and 25. What do you say, James?
Okay, I'll take this. I'm actually publishing something tomorrow that does try and predict the price based on the amount of fund flows, because what's really driving the Bitcoin price at the moment is the hype around an ETF being launched in the United States on Bitcoin, a spot ETF. And that really is, and people are starting to sort of second guess, well, just how much money might flow into Bitcoin as a result of this. And, if you took 10% of there's a $14.4 trillion of assets in the United States that could invest theoretically in Bitcoin. If you assume 10% invested and they all had a 1% position in their portfolio, that would equate to around $14 billion of inflows. I mean, if that happens, then that is the largest inflows on record. We saw about $10 billion of inflows during the bull market in 2021, and that had a big influence on price. I mean, I'm not saying there will be $14 billion of inflows. It's actually very hard to tell what it will be. But the analysis we're looking at could push Bitcoin north of 100,000. If that is genuinely true, we see that level of inflows, that $14 billion of inflows, it could be very supportive for Bitcoin price. I think it's important at this point, though, to highlight both the negatives and the positives for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very much driven, until this point, about exchanged ETFs in the United States. It's very much driven by monetary policy, and that's important. I mean, Bitcoin is this store of value, and it's competing with other stores of value. So when the interest rates rise in the United States, it pushes up treasury yields, making them look on a relative basis more attractive to Bitcoin. So rising interest rates in the United States tend to be quite bad for Bitcoin, and that's part of the reason why I think Bitcoin's done so well this year. Aside from all the banking problems and political problems in the United States, the backing off of rising interest rates from the Fed, and it looks like there will be no more rate hikes in this cycle now, and it looks like they're going to start cutting in 2024. That's another point I think that could be very supportive for Bitcoin. And then we have something called the halving. I actually don't think that's going to have too much of an impact on price, because it's kind of perfectly known information. But it is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, so it might have some impact.
Yeah, Bitcoin tend to, like, I saw some charts on it, like Bitcoin tend to go up like when the halving is getting closer, and then after the halving, because everyone is like, oh, Bitcoin is gonna halve, so let's just buy it, because the price is gonna go up. And then after the halving, it's like nothing happens, so that people tend to sell off.
Well, yeah, and then it definitely, people have, sometimes they say 6 months after the halving, the price has really risen. And that is true, but I think a lot of the 2020 price movement was to do with COVID rather than anything to do with the halving. So, it's a bit, of a misnomer. It was much more about monetary policy in COVID, I think, ultimately, that time around. Keen to answer a few more questions.
Yeah. So there was a question from Sportsnet. You've asked some questions. I don't know if I think we answered it before, but how does your crypto company navigate regulatory challenges while fostering innovation? And what steps are taken to ensure sustained user trust amid an evolving crypto landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's definitely in my wheelhouse. I mean, I am, in addition to being head of product, at the forefront often of discussions with regulators. I think, first and foremost, the way we do that is by ensuring, similar to the question, that our products are built well and that they operate appropriately, and that we that we can show regulators, and we've had regulators come in that when they look at our processes and our operations, the way we build the product, the results for our investors, that we do it in the right way. There's nothing worse, I mean, than having problems that lead to regulatory questions. And I think, the longer we're around, the more comfortable regulators get with what we're offering, the more they see investor interaction. It's sort of a virtuous circle across the board. And, in many ways, we continue to, user trust is driven very much by James, I think, in terms of the content space, and we have a fantastic research team. They're often, cutting edge, both in terms of James, especially which is portfolio management analysis, and the rest of his team, who often focus on the very technicals of the digital asset, ecosystem. And I think, that, as well as building product that's best in breed with reasonable pricing, delivering the results, and making sure the products operate in good and bad times, is the kind of thing that builds both user and regulatory trust over time. Innovations, in terms of, we were the first in Europe to offer staking on a transparent and holistic basis, where through our physical range, we say to investors, it's 0 fees, and here's the annual staking rate. We then also were able to solve some of the challenges that arise with that. And that, that product's working, that product is paying off that rate to investors. Regulators and users sees that. And again, that's a virtuous circle around, around really building the understanding and the trust in what we're doing. As one of the market leaders, we're very, very focused on security in the custodian and making sure that we work with Komainu. We've also added Zodia, that we work with best of breed custodians, that we have robust operational processes around the security with deposits and withdrawals, and that, we have a real meaningful security protocols in terms of who can access the crypto, how it can be moved, the protocols requiring, multi-factor authorization, 2-person authorization on both sides internally here with a custodian to make sure that, you whitelisting wallets that certain crypto can only be sent to certain wallets and so on. So that, we're really trying to build internally a very robust ecosystem for dealing with operationally with digital assets, as well externally with our reputation. And, so far, I think we've really been doing very well with that.
Awesome, thanks. There was a super chat. It's like a sound effect is gonna come soon, but from Jonsky, and he's asking, what do you think about ADA, which is Cardano, I guess. That's for James.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute button. I'm technically incompetent. Yes, I think this goes for quite a few different cryptocurrencies, actually. Many altcoins, that's anything other than Bitcoin, has to it's either trying to compete with Bitcoin, and then the question then becomes, well, is it better than Bitcoin? Is it growing in the same way? Is it the same market size as Bitcoin? The answer is probably no for a lot of those. Like Bitcoin Cash is a good example of that, which really tried to challenge Bitcoin. In the case of ADA or Cardano, it is competing with other smart contracting platforms like Solana and like Ethereum. And the most important thing here is to ask, when you are a small network like Cardano, does it have the same number of users? Is its user base growing? It's a bit like looking at a social network, say Facebook 15 years ago. The most important thing for Facebook was the size of its network, and that's what made it. And I think it's the same for many smart contracting platforms. You can talk all day long about, Solana having or Cardano having super fast transaction speeds, but if it hasn't got the same number of developers, if it hasn't got the same network size, is it ever going to be as successful? And I think, and the answer is probably no. So then the answer then becomes, can Solana find niches for themselves where they can really define themselves? Mm-hmm. And I think potentially Cardano could find that niche within the gaming sector, for instance, and maybe the NFT sector. Mm-hmm. But these, I think, are still unanswered questions. And I think, whenever you're looking at small companies to grow in, on the traditional equity markets, they don't necessarily have a proven track record yet. So you have to kind of believe in their case and in order for them to be successful. And I think that's still the case for Cardano. It's not got its proven earnings track record. It's still in this process of trying to prove itself, and that's quite a difficult thing to judge, in my view. And personally, I think something like Ethereum is much more attractive because it just has that massive developer network. Yes, it has some challenges, but it is slowly but surely overcoming many of those challenges.
And here's another question similar to the previous one from Siot. He asked, has the market for smaller cryptos changed as many seek less risk? So I guess, like, have you seen any change in volume and so on, or is it changing now maybe?
Absolutely. I mean, so I think, whenever this rally has been led by Bitcoin, they call it Bitcoin, the dominance, and it has been dominating. But yes, as this very early stages of the bull market progresses, it will lift up other cryptocurrencies. And I was just looking at Avalanche the other day. I think it's up 66% in the last week. So clearly, there are those cryptocurrencies where it's lifting up, and some of them are detached from fundamentals, if I must add. We at Coinshares have written, I think, about 15 different what we call asset highlights, looking at detailed research on and the management and the structure of these different cryptocurrencies, and try to help people understand them. And I do think people really need to do their homework on these cryptocurrencies, these altcoins, before they invest.
I see. Here's another one from Sportsnet. Yes, sir.
Oh, I've seen one that I'd quite like to take. That I quite like. It's a bit further back in the list, but it says, it was about, what do you think about the impact that mining crypto has on the climate from an energy uses? And this is a really important one and hugely misunderstood. There was actually a paper written in, I think, 2018 in the journal, a scientific journal called Nature. And in that paper, there were a lot of mistakes, actually. They even confused gigatons and megatons of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere, which was pretty bad. But, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding here. And actually, there was a time when, particularly when there's a lot of mining in China, that it was powered using coal power. And so there was a very close correlation between what they call the hash power, that's the amount of mining equipment out there running mining, and the amount of energy being used. The two were very closely correlated. But actually, since a lot of China implemented a ban on mining, the industry has become much more environmentally friendly for several reasons. You've seen a dramatic rise in hash power, that's the number of mining equipment, but it is much, much more efficient than it was back then. Also, crypto mining, to remain competitive, don't forget there is 900 Bitcoin produced every day. You can't change that. It doesn't matter if there's 2 miners or 2 million miners in the world, the same amount of Bitcoin is produced every day. So it ultimately becomes a competition for energy. So those miners tend to seek out the cheapest forms of energy, which often are actually stranded renewable energy resources. So take hydroelectric power plants as an example. Some hydroelectric power plants aren't profitable, but if they can mine Bitcoin and supplement it, quite often it supplements that income. So it actually makes unprofitable renewable power profitable. So it can actually be a real force for good. And what we found now, this is a report, this is not me saying this is a report by KPMG, 53% of the industry is now sourced, mining industry is now sourced from a renewable resource. And that is much better than, say, the industrial sector, which is only 36%, and the financial sector, which is only 40%. So it is actually becoming increasingly more sustainable asset class.
Yeah, good take there, yeah. So the one from Sportsnet, if you're a small investor, should you spread your capital, I guess, like diversify to different cryptocurrencies or all in on one?
Look, I suppose this is the mantra, right? If you look at traditional investing, it has been spread across multiple cryptocurrencies. I think some of the challenges with that is that the liquidity in the smaller crypto, you go outside the top 2 or 3 cryptocurrencies, the liquidity drops off dramatically. So it depends obviously how big, but you're saying small investors, so perhaps liquidity is less important in that respect. But still, I still think you have to look at the fundamental investment cases, and I still think in these early days there really lacks enough. I think Coinshares are doing a lot of research in this space, but there lacks a breadth of credible research in the crypto industry. So I still think it's better to try and kind of stock pick, so to speak, and find cryptocurrencies that have really compelling growth stories rather than going for the broader baskets in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I usually say when my viewers ask me for, okay, which cryptos should I buy? But I usually tend to say like get the bigger ones first, and then you can pick like the smaller ones, right? So you have like a little stable basket of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then you can pick some smaller ones just for fun, like a little spice, on the top of the, yeah, you know what I
But
mean.
quite often at that point, that's when the due diligence goes out the window. You say, oh, I've done my homework on these. What I'm trying to say is really do your homework on those smaller coins as
Yeah.
well, and understand, have they got a niche that's going to really work for them? Like Tezos, for instance, I think is starting to define a niche for itself in the gaming industry.
Yeah. Neosime asked, what do you think about governments creating their own crypto coin solutions, worries and challenges?
Yeah, so around 70%, according to the Bank for International Settlements, are researching what they call CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. They reflect their cryptocurrency, their underlying currencies one for one. So they reflect the same monetary policy. There's no difference. I think in a way, many ways, what we think of as CBDCs, we kind of have a little bit now. We rarely use cash now. I know that's hardly anyone uses cash in the Nordics these days, and so there wouldn't be a huge amount of change for us. I think where they can really help, though, is in cross-border payment systems, tax collection, accounting practices. It can really help make those much more efficient, and also settlement. You could have settlement of investments within seconds rather than days. So there's some very positive aspects of CBDCs, but I think there's also a dark side to them as well, and that is that why have CBDCs been so popular in China and places like Russia and other authoritarian states? It's because you can control your population. Technically, you could ensure that, and then you could tailor an individual interest rate. If you felt someone wasn't good with their money, you could force a very high interest rate on them to make them better. You could also say what they could and couldn't buy. So I think there are huge privacy challenges to central bank digital currencies, and that's perhaps why we've not seen them implemented much in the developed world yet. I think they are coming. I don't think they're necessarily a threat to something like Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has a completely different monetary policy, and in fact perhaps keeps central banks in check. If central banks decide to force negative interest rates on people through a CBDC, then people would just start using Bitcoin more.
And I saw like a comment in the chat. It's more of a joke. It's like, oh no, not poop coin. But I think it's actually interesting because what do you say to people who are like negative to cryptocurrencies, and like if they want to like step their toes into cryptos? I usually say like maximum like 5 to 10% of my own like net worth having that into crypto. But what do you say to people that are like fully negative on like cryptocurrencies and so on?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand is that it's not easy to understand. It takes some time to get your head around it. So just take your time doing a bit of work, homework. I'd say the first thing to know about specifically Bitcoin is that it is the first thing on the internet you can't copy and paste. Now, it's solved it's genuinely a computer science breakthrough that solved what they call the Byzantine generals problem, which has been about getting people to cooperate in a network together, and it solved the double spend problem. And it genuinely is that. Think about that, something you can't copy and paste on the internet potentially has a form of value. Now, I appreciate that is subjective, but I think the more you look into it, the more you realize it's very elegant. And the Bitcoin creators, he, she, or they, have thought deeply about existing monetary policy and the problems with it. Now, in terms of it being a portfolio, I think there's it's been well proven. Even if you bought at the peak at 68,000, and you averaged $100 in every month to date, you would still be positive at this point. So averaging in is actually a very good strategy. And in terms of sizing in the portfolio, well, that very much depends on your appetite for risk. Coinshares was famous for talking about 4% position in a portfolio. But that, if you regularly rebalance in a portfolio, that adds at about 100 basis points of additional risk. Now, that might be too much for some people. A 2% position would add 40 basis points of additional risk. The important thing here is if volatility is something you've struggled with in a portfolio, then actually regular rebalancing. So let's say you have a target of, say, 4%. If the Bitcoin price declines, then you reallocate back into Bitcoin to achieve that 4% every quarter. And then if the price rallies, you sell some to reallocate back to 4%. It's a very good way of what they call enhancing Sharpe ratios, improving risk-adjusted returns.
And speaking about the upcoming triggers that we usually speak about, so we have the Bitcoin halving, and then we have like ETFs. So can you speak a little bit about the ETFs that is going on for those people who don't know, like what's going on?
Sure, I'll take that. I think it's been over a decade-long project to try to launch a physically backed spot ETF on Bitcoin in the United States. It was first started by the Winklevoss twins. They launched a filing, I think, in 2013. It took the SEC around 4 years to finally ultimately reject that filing. And on the back of that filing, a number of others came. And I think in total it was probably 9 to 11 were made, and the SEC continually rejected them. They also rejected an attempt by Grayscale, which is the largest Bitcoin fund in the United States. It's actually a closed-ended fund, so it's not an ETF, to convert into an ETF and become open-ended, which would allow for creation and redemptions, because right now holders in Grayscale are essentially locked in. They have no way to effectively get out of the security unless they sell in the secondary market, but it was trading at a discount because you can't actually, like, unlike an ETF, there's no creation redemption function. So Grayscale attempted to convert into an ETF to allow for open-ended creation redemption, and the SEC said no. And the SEC has used the same argumentation for the last decade to reject these applications. At the same time, at a certain point, the SEC allowed for a futures ETF to be launched and listed, and Grayscale used that to sue the SEC on the basis that they were being arbitrary and capricious, because there was fundamentally no difference between having a futures product and a spot product. That suit was filed in what's called the DC Circuit of Court of Appeals. United States, it's the one that governs essentially the SEC, and they lost very badly. They lost actually 3-0, in which the court unanimously ruled, all three judges from different political persuasions, so not necessarily a court tilting to the right or left, but generally all three judges from different political persuasions all uniformly agreed the SEC had acted in an arbitrary and capricious way, which is not allowed under something called the Administrative Procedures Act, and therefore that they vacated the order the SEC gave to deny Grayscale's conversion. This, of course, has sort of put the SEC into a blind alley with their ability to otherwise reject or continue to delay the launch of these ETFs. And so immediately after that, once having kind of recognized that their options were limited, they decided not to appeal to the larger circuit. There are 17 judges. They could have asked all of them to opine on the situation. They decided, given the fact they lost 3-0, not to do that. And they've now begun to engage meaningfully with the various, I think it's 12 different providers now, something like that, who are seeking to launch this product. And by engage meaningfully, I mean, I think they've come to terms with the fact that it will be approved, and now they're kind of talking to them about fixing their prospectus, comments on the prospectus, things that hadn't happened before because you never really gotten back beyond the fundamental stage. So we're seeing two things. I mean, I think the approval process works fundamentally. Well, there'll be something called a 19b4, which is the rule change that NASDAQ or NYSE asked for that will allow them ultimately to list. And then that's sort of a very public approval of the product. That's where the product's kind of fallen down before. That is coming. Timing is unclear, but I think it could be sometime in December, most likely in January. And then on the back of that, the SEC will finalize the so-called S1s, the prospectuses, and eventually they'll be listed. So I think you'll expect to see, a lot of hype once the approval order comes through, and then you'll see the ultimate listing and launch, which will allow for the inflows that James was talking about, which will also drive interest. So overall, my take, I mean, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I was on air with another well-known crypto podcast saying it looks very unlikely. The SEC have been very, very insistent. However, depending on this Grayscale case, and of course, indeed, surprised. I think the SEC and a lot of us in the securities I'm an ex-securities lawyer in the securities bar, the SEC lost pretty badly. So I think, the approval is pretty much on track. It would be surprising if they didn't grant it. I think my current estimate is sometime in Q1, January, February, looking for an actual launch of probably all the products close to the same time, and at which point those products will be able to open for business and taking inflows and potentially driving demand in the way James was talking about.
That's pretty interesting. So
I
Q1.
will say this just to jump in. I mean, it frustrates me as I'm an American lawyer, but by training. But actually, it frustrates me that when everyone's like, "Where's the Bitcoin ETF?" Well, in reality, in Europe, as you see with XBT and the other products, we've had a thriving, Bitcoin exchange traded product ecosystem that has, really developed and moved, and we're far beyond anything the SEC is considering what's going on in the U.S. But unfortunately, all the attention goes on because the U.S. is the largest capital markets in the world, the deepest pockets. Just
But
getting
I
that
guess
one ETF,
everyone just wants the ETF to get launched, so they hope for a bull run, right? So the price skyrockets. But so to those people wondering, like, can you explain in short, like, what's the difference on an ETF and your ETPs?
So, I mean, well, okay. So structurally speaking, even the ETF for Bitcoin in the United States is not what I would call an ETF. An ETF essentially is an exchange traded fund, and by fund we're talking an actual fund structure. So what would generally be a UCITS fund in Europe and a 40 Act fund in the United States. This is by law, by kind of legal structure, a fund. Germans call them a Sondervermögen, and every jurisdiction recognizes something that by its legal nature is a fund, and therefore all the rights and obligations of a fund apply. Now, in Europe, the UCITS rules don't allow you to do alternative assets, whether it's gold or digital assets, into a fund structure. Anything that has a fund structure that does an alternative asset generally ends up being some kind of AIF, alternative investment fund. Of course, those are limited in terms of their ability for public distribution. So what we did, and when I was at ETF Securities, now WisdomTree, is we built a whole new structure that gives similar protections, but obviously is outside the fund regime and is fundamentally a debt security. It's a debt security because debt is not a fund, and a debt can still be registered under the prospectus directive and publicly offered. And then we built in protections to make sure that we try to copy, to the extent this is in the physical product, the same protections that a fund would have. So, I mean, fundamentally, it is driven by regulation. It's driven by the requirements for UCITS and the fact that UCITS won't allow you to do things like gold and digital assets in a fund structure. So we had to come up with new structures to offer this widely to the public in the way that it's offered now. And that is generally the debt instrument or certificate that people see.
Cool. Okay, we had a question before from Johan. What's your honest price prediction
at this one.
for Bitcoin 2030? If you just can say one number.
My honest answer is I don't know. But I think you can make some good guesses. And you can structure guesses in a sensible way. And I think one of the better things to do is understand what Bitcoin is. It's a form of money, and it's a kind of store of value. And in that reason, you could say that it's like the newest, most technically best form of money. So if you look at gold, for instance, it was a form of money that's not really used anymore specifically as money anymore, as a medium of exchange, because I can't sprinkle gold down a telephone line and give it to someone. It has to be in physical, but you can with something like Bitcoin. It is a store of value that you can transfer electronically very easily, so it's technically better than gold, right? And there's various different things that Bitcoin is competing with. It's competing with M2, money supply. It's competing with central banks who buy gold. It's competing with corporate treasury reserves. I saw there's a question about MicroStrategy, and I happen to answer that in a moment as well. And it's also competing with gold. If you take just gold alone, you could say it could take a certain market share of gold. If I said that, okay, the price could hit 100,000, that might seem a bit crazy, but if I was to say to you that only represents 17% of gold's market share, actually that's not so unreasonable. And then when you start to look at if it took say 2% of global M2. I'm not saying that will happen. That would equate to a Bitcoin price of 500,000. So you can construct this valuation framework, a very simple one. They call it total addressable market valuation, to get to sort of a number in 2030. Now, I can guarantee you I could come up with a number and it would be wrong if you asked me to be honest. But that is the best way, I think, to kind of look at it and understand it. And on the MicroStrategy front, I think the question was, will there be other companies doing the same? Yeah, I think we have seen a trend. I mean, MicroStrategy is an extreme version. The guy's gone pretty crazy and bought a lot of Bitcoin, which he's doing quite well on. I think, and it's led some shareholders to be cautious. But I think there's a good reasons for companies outside of the United States that want to own Bitcoin, want to hedge against depreciating US dollar, for instance. Actually, there is a small but growing trend of companies buying it as a corporate treasury reserve. And so, yes, I do think people will follow suit as with MicroStrategy, but not quite in the same magnitude, I don't think.
Good answer. So there's another one from Siot, which asks, which countries are at the forefront of crypto network applications?
Good question. I think the better way is, so this is actually a very difficult thing to ascertain. We've been trying to look at geographical diversification of Bitcoin usage, and it's actually incredibly difficult. You can look at Bitcoin trading volumes. So for instance, we know in Turkey that Bitcoin is very popular because its currency is the Turkish lira has been depreciating dramatically, and that's had if you look at Bitcoin price in Turkish lira, it's at all-time highs now. And there are actually many other countries like that, like Argentina, Venezuela, and actually that is those kind of countries where we see Bitcoin usage at its highest. They estimate that roughly 7% or 8% of people own Bitcoin in Turkey. There is a high correlation between political instability and Bitcoin usage. If you are a refugee in Ukraine, it's much safer to cross the border with a USB stick with Bitcoin on it than it is to cross the border with a suitcase full of cash. How's that? Alexei Navalny in Russia funds much of his political campaign through Bitcoin. So it has this kind of stateless asset nature that has real uses, I think. Also don't forget, and the reason why I think in emerging markets we've seen a much greater pickup in usage is because there are 1.7 billion people around the world that don't have a bank account. Bitcoin gives them the option of a bank account that is free, and it's the only thing you need is access to the internet anywhere in the world. So it's almost like a sort of, for the first time ever, they can have a bank account, and it's an international one at that. So that's where the most of the usage, in terms of I suppose that's the answer in terms of applications. That's ultimately where I think a lot of the grassroots, the organic growth of Bitcoin is happening.
Yeah, it's kind of aligning with this question as well. Roughly 4 in 10 adults who have heard about crypto say they are not at all confident with it. How do you handle the overall opinion about this subject? And I think I agree with you on that, because most people, they say, like, here in Sweden, we have it very good, like with digitalized finance, no cash, everything is digital. But people forget what you mentioned, James, that most people in the world don't have a bank account. And I think that's what we need to spread word about, because the potential of Bitcoin is not like whether we want a Bitcoin ETF or not, right? I don't know. What's your opinion?
I think there needs to be some necessity. Now, in emerging markets, if you're looking at your currency rapidly depreciating, there's a necessity to spend a bit of time understanding the technicalities around how to own Bitcoin. In the developed worlds, we have the luxury of very stable currencies for now, at least, and so there's less of a need to really own it for that reason. And so, I think it's actually not as hard. You can set up a wallet in a couple of minutes online if you spend a small amount of time researching it. In fact, on our website, coinshares.com, we've got many guides on how this works. And so, I think ultimately what will drive it is necessity to spend a little bit of time. I mean, it's like a mobile phone, they're technically not easy things to understand, but you use them out of necessity and you figure out how to use them. And I think Bitcoin's in the same category ultimately.
Mm-hmm. There was a question of here from Niasheim. Would it be realistic for a Bitcoin ETF to pay, for example, monthly dividends?
Well, I don't know how it would generate that yield. I guess you could have one that potentially lent the coin out, but I mean, unless Bitcoin starts generating some yield, there's no way to create that yield from that asset. So I don't. I mean, strictly speaking, I guess you could lend it out, pay the returns through, and that would be. But yeah, that's more like a
It has its
leasing.
risks as well.
Yeah, no, it has a lot.
Risks.
But I mean, but the idea of a dividend for Bitcoin, unless Bitcoin actually can generate that yield, we're limited by what the underlying asset could do. We do offer similar things with proof of stake protocols because they do allow for some kind of yield. But Bitcoin as it stands right now, unless you're lending, and as James says, lending for us has a lot of risks that we generally don't engage in, is not possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've had you now for 1 hour. You've answered most questions I don't know how to say it, but you have really good answers. And so I just want to throw the ball to the chat because I know, James, you had something you had to leave for. So if you have any more questions, make sure you put them in now so we have time to answer them.
There's one that says "om Buffett inte." I can't say it in Swedish. Is that about
Buffett.
Warren Buffett? Is that
yes?
What was that?
He said if Buffett is not interested in it, no one should.
Yeah, good question. I'd say this is one point. It's definitely the younger generation understand Bitcoin than the older generation. I mean, digital assets mean something. On a more serious note, digital assets mean something much more to younger people. My son spent $200 on Fortnite on a skin for gaming, and I thought he was crazy. And then a year later, he sold it for $400. To him, that skin was an asset, and I think you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? And I think getting old people to understand Bitcoin is a much greater challenge than it is younger people.
A good one. Okay, here's another one to ruin the fun. From what I've heard, XBT is not backed by real Bitcoin. Can you clarify this? And also, who is storing the BTC and where?
Sure. I mean, I think, structurally speaking, as I said before, XBT, because the way it was created in 2015 and the fact that we can't change it, is a synthetically backed product. Now, there's two ways to back a product. Either it's physical, where the issuer itself holds the underlying, or synthetic, where the issuer goes out and enters into a derivative or a contract with someone who promised to provide the exposure. I would say XBT is sort of in the middle because, yes, it has a contract, that collateral management agreement I was talking about with one of its affiliates, but that affiliate actually holds physical Bitcoin. And as I was saying, as you showed earlier, if you look at the Ledger Lens recording, we are overhedged in terms of the net exposure with the underlying asset. So from a strict legal perspective, I think it's correct to say it's not actually physically backed, and I'm not going to deny that, because the way it was created by the initial Bitcoin miner was that it involved a swap where it contracts with someone else. But the way we've structured it over the years is that the swap agreement, the collateral management agreement, specifies very clearly the type of backing required, and then we show investors what that backing looks like. So if you compare it on a one-for-one basis, say, to some of the physical products that are listed in Xetra, it is not what we call physically backed. That does not mean, though, that we're not doing our best to make sure that we mitigate those risks, and that if you look at what we hold and the way we hold it, the disclosure we give around the collateral management agreement, we're trying to do our best to make sure it is as close as possible to physically backing.
Can I make the point here that the website you're showing right now is using an independent auditor called LedgerLens, and this is a really interesting thing about cryptocurrencies, is that you can do live auditing. So this is a live attestation, a live audit of our holdings. So you can see we have the hedging is well above the underlying. So that's
so this is your position, kind of, and this is what the.
That's right. That's the black is what the issuer owes investors, and the blue is what the affiliate who provides the exposure to the issuer holds to back that. And so that is identifiable, and it can be calculated. It's an independent auditing company that does that calculation and then publishes it on the website.
So if the blue bar here goes below the black, I should be scared.
I mean, you would definitely be right, and we would expect a number of investor questions, and I would be talking to my trading team about what was going on. But in general, there's quite a significant overhedge, and we've been managing this position for a number of years, and I think we have great processes in place, and in touch with the regulator about how we do it. Also trying to disclose to investors to let them know how it works. I mean, we're not trying to hide anything. I think there are as a product structure, I would say there are things with XBT that unfortunately you might not build now, but you have to remember XBT was launched. It was the first to market. It was a tremendous feat by the people who launched it in 2015. They did it in a way that was doable at the time. And what we've done is we've taken that structure and we're continually improving upon it. So you say it's not backed by real Bitcoin. It is backed by real Bitcoin, but that Bitcoin is not necessarily directly held by the issuer. It's held by an affiliate who has promised the issuer and guaranteed the issuer's payment.
Oh, and on that, there was a good question here. So if the affiliate goes down, maybe FTX, let's say, hopefully not, or it gets hacked like Mt. Gox, are we all screwed?
Yes, there is, and this isn't clear in disclosure. Unfortunately, with the structure, there's a certain amount of credit risk to the affiliate. Unfortunately, that is just also an unfortunate reality. Again, I want to emphasize the way we've been managing this. We've gone through the heights, the highs and the lows, the FTXs, the Lunas, and everything, and we're still standing. And that hedge has been standing. We're very prudent, and we manage that risk very cautiously.
Good one. There's another one here by Emil. Do you think Bitcoin crypto will be talked more about in politics? For example, the next election in the USA.
I'll take this one, and James, you can jump in. I mean, I think my personal theory, and as an American voter, is that it'll be talked about, but it won't be actioned. I think Congress is still stuck in an amount of gridlock. It would surprise me if they could come to some kind of consensus on a uniform set of rules, similar to what you have with MiCA in Europe. The hope, springs eternal. My expectation, though, is it might be talked about, but it won't be actioned.
So I think, similar to what Townsend's saying, I do think it will be a growing political issue, Bitcoin, just generally, because it does in some ways challenge existing fiat currencies. And it's actually an incredibly difficult movement to stop. This is, a distributed ledger all around the world that a government can't influence, a government can't block in many respects. And so I think it will just steadily march on, and maybe we get to a point where it does start to challenge fiat currencies. If you're in a country where the monetary policy is incredibly irresponsible, like in some ways, I suppose that Venezuela, people will start to favor an alternate currency. Now, sometimes that's the dollar, but what happens if it's not the dollar? And I think Bitcoin will always be there to take up that, and I think will cause political friction at times, because governments will see it as a threat to their tax base, to their tax collection base. But ultimately, I'm not sure it's something you can stop. And there's actually, from a personal perspective, a big reason why I'm involved in cryptocurrency. Not from an anti-government perspective, but I do think it could well be the future of money.
So as a follow-up on the previous question, so basically there's a double counterparty risk with XBT. Is that?
I would say it's a single counterparty risk overall to the Coinshares group.
All right.
I think the counterparty risk essentially flows through XBT onto the provider of the collateral management agreement, who holds those assets that we use in the LedgerLens to show. Yes.
Cool. I think also the question then becomes about is how viable is Coinshares as a going concern. You know, we are Europe's largest digital asset manager. We have $4 billion of assets under management. You know, we're very liquid, and we're a listed company with all the sort of prudent accounting principles that you would expect of a listed company. So I think on a relative basis, we're on a very sound footing.
Yeah,
In
I mean, and
Sweden-
look, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
you go.
I mean, to be honest, I think we've never hidden this fact. I mean, I think it's a reality. I think the XBT was created by KNC Mining Company back in 2015. It's the structure they used, you know, and it's one that we inherited when we purchased it, and we've done a lot to make sure that we put rope, because they were obviously, I think we purchased it because they were going bankrupt. Put procedures and processes in place to make sure we protect investors as much as possible, given that structure.
There was a question here. What was the main reason that XBT went down / bankrupt back in the days?
I think, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I believe, if memory serves, that they overexpanded in mining equipment, Bitcoin mining equipment, that then became unprofitable. So it wasn't XBT; it was the miner who was providing the hedge. Essentially, I think they were securitizing their holdings via XBT, and then they essentially expanded into mining and buying a lot of graphic card equipment that wasn't from a. It's just classic case of a miner over investing in its equipment and not being able to really monetize that or get return on capital, which put them in trouble. I think if you look, I think it's KNC Cloud Miner. I don't really know much about them, but I think that's the entity that initially launched it in 2015.
So there's another question: what would happen if all the Bitcoin is mined? Ultimately, unless you can change the protocol, which is incredible, I think you've got a better chance of changing the protocol of government monetary policy in the United States. Give Jerome Powell a call and ask him to print more money. You've got more chance of doing that than you have of changing the monetary policy of Bitcoin, essentially, because it is this large distributed network. But in the protocol, it states that there's a very transparent supply curve, so you don't finish mining Bitcoin until 2130 or 2140, and that supply curve is very much set in stone. So it isn't suddenly, it'll be 99% will be mined by 2030, but we'll spend the next 100 years mining the last 1%. And actually, the way the system is structured, that over time less will be mined, and there'll be greater income from transactions. So that will slowly take over and become more beneficial to get involved in transactions space rather than mining itself.
And just to jump in there, I think if I understand the question correctly, I think the certificate, just to be clear, we don't mine. The initial provider of XBT was a miner, but mining is not connected to our ability to hedge the underlying, because essentially what happens is, if you buy XBT for, let's say, $100, 100 SEK, we then go and buy 100 SEK of Bitcoin. It's not connected. I mean, mining, obviously, as James was saying, has an impact on the overall ecosystem, but it's not relevant or necessary for our process of selling a certificate into the market and using the proceeds to hedge ourselves. That functions as long as you can actually buy and sell the Bitcoin or the Ethereum. So the mining, if mining stops or all Bitcoin's mined, it's irrelevant to our ability to, as long as the network continues to function, which, as James said, it will, it's irrelevant to our ability to actually provide the hedge and make sure that investors get the benefit of the one-for-one appreciation in the price.
Here's a comment about what is the biggest downside with cryptocurrency at the time. What can really bring the prices down?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things: a government ban or government regulation. I mean, you can't really ban Bitcoin, but you can ban the on and the off ramps of Bitcoin, so prevent exchanges from converting it to a fiat currency. That wouldn't be great. And then very aggressive monetary policy. So the Fed really hiking rates very aggressive. I think they're the kind of two things that, you know, really keep investors awake at night. I think on both fronts, it looks like the Fed's backing off from monetary policy. It looks like it's going to cut rates next year. So I think in terms of ban, well, it looks like governments are regulating. We've just got the SEC about to approve a Bitcoin ETF and probably an Ethereum one shortly afterwards as well. We've got MiCA, the MiCA Directive Markets and Crypto Assets Directive in Europe, and that's about regulating it, not banning it. So I think, you know, those risks are probably just tail risks rather than kind of core key risks for Bitcoin, in my view.
Yeah, it just feels like it's getting better and better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been, we write a survey, we issue a survey every quarter asking investors what the key concerns are. 60% of them say government ban. And so that has fallen actually from 60% in the prior survey to just about 50%. So that worry is slowly subsiding over time as people realize it's regulation, not ban, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, what do you say? Are we wrapping up crypto speak? And I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
You own cryptos. What kind of cryptos do you own?
Bitcoin and Ethereum. In XBT Provider, actually, because I bought it many years ago. So and physical. I own a few NFTs as well. I own a Damien Hirst NFT, which is just a bit of fun, and that's it really.
Good one.
Yeah, James is definitely that. I have a small holding. I have 3 children and various costs associated. So I try to manage my portfolio. I have a small bucket of risk that I take for crypto, but it's a relatively, and this is to go back to one of your points. I'm a TradFi guy. I've always been known as the crypto skeptic in the office. I think, the exposure is relevant to the type of risk you want to take. And I have friends who are also skeptics, and we talk about, managing your exposure based on the risk. And so a lot of people like me have small risk buckets that they allocate to crypto. And that's sort of that, that's okay. I recognize there's a big drawdown, possible volatility, but I sort of put it away and just don't look at it and hope for the best.
Tansen, he's already very long crypto.
I am. I work for Coinshares,
company.
so my financial health is definitely tied to the way that we build the business and then we move forward.
Cool. Yeah, and I have to disclose myself. So I have Bitcoin, Ethereum, I have Binance Coin, I have Solana, I have a bunch of altcoins, but yeah, the majority is Bitcoin and Ethereum and LBNB, but of course through some certificates as well. So usually I do a little bit more of swing trading on your XBT products, and then I have like a long directly owned cryptos. Yeah. Also because of the taxes, right? So it's so nice to be able to just swing trade your XBT products and not like on an ISK account in Sweden, so you don't have to care about the declaration because it's a nightmare for regular cryptos.
Yeah, I mean, as an American citizen, definitely a nightmare for me as well. So
it's a pain. Cool. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. And if anyone in the chat has any more questions about your products, how can they reach you?
Info at XBT Provider or info at physicalcoinshares.com. On our website, you can find kind of emails. They go directly to me and my team, so we're always happy to respond under the to investor questions. We get quite a lot of them. Some of the questions asked here, questions about how the formula is calculated, and so any questions, definitely go to the website. There's direct emails that you can use to contact us.
Awesome. James, and your research thing comes out soon, or what was it?
Yes, it's publishing tomorrow. It's called ETF Launch Price Impact. And, again, I'm quite approachable. More than happy, you can find me on LinkedIn. More than happy to answer questions on LinkedIn too.
Perfect. Awesome. Cool. Thanks for staying with me for this long, over an hour, guys. So I'm going to continue speaking about cryptos in Swedish and stocks and funds now. So I hope I'll see you in the future.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks for having us.
See you. Thanks a lot.
Bye everyone.
Ja, då var det bara jag kvar. Nu kör vi svenska då, lite mer bekväm för det. Men det gick ju bra att köra engelska också, eller vad säger ni? Ja, det var kul. Jag fick ju lite feedback på att jag hade bra engelska. Så det var väldigt roligt, och för er som inte visste det är ju ett betalt samarbete med XBT Provider då. Så vad säger ni? 70 pers som sitter och kollar. Vi har ju lite böcker kvar med, så att det är ju faktiskt ganska stor chans för er som tittar att vinna lite såna här miljonärsböcker med. Så nu är det bara på och ställ en massa frågor om börsen. Och har ni några fler frågor om liksom kryptovalutor eller så är det bara att slänga dem på mig. Så ska vi se om vi får upp min gamla klassiker här. Jajamän, där har vi den. Tekniken funkar idag, vad skönt. Skönt att höra. Det var som fan. King, du skötte det fint, skrev Safa. Tack så mycket för det. Tegelsten, vad roligt att se dig med. Hej, din bästa aktie just nu i portföljen och sämsta procentuellt. Jag är ju inne på min bolagsportfölj som vanligt. Och i dagsläget på den här så ser det ut som att Evolution ligger bäst till. Jag plockade faktiskt in lite Evolution här om veckan tror jag. Så det var bara en liten slatt till bolagsportföljen då. Men det är den som ligger bäst där. Privata portföljen. Vad kan det vara? Det är inte mycket som är blått längre i privata portföljen. Men Castellum har ju gått upp till plus nu som tur är. Vad är det mer jag har för någonting? Duni har gått bra. Svedbergs har gått helt okej. Så ja, det är väl de då som har gått bra. Men annars är det fonderna som visar mest plus. För att grejen är att jag ligger ju ganska mycket plus i Investor också. Men där har jag ju switchat från Investor B till Investor A. Så då vet jag inte exakt hur mycket plus jag ligger då. Nu börjar streamen på riktigt, skriver vi. Ja, visst. Vilken kryptovålet är bäst eller mest säkrast att använda? Jag har faktiskt en guide på det. Och så om du går in på Spara Cash och sen så söker du på Bitcoin Wallet så ska du nog kunna hitta den guiden. Nu som sagt, som vanligt så är det lite långsamt internet när jag går in själv. Men vi ska se om vi hittar den här. Äntligen kom den upp. Vi kan nog hitta den via menyn faktiskt. Bitcoin Wallet, kryptovalutor och sen Bitcoin Wallet. Så den säkraste är ju egentligen de här hårdvaru-walletsen som är liksom en ledger eller en trezor. Och då är det ju typ som ett litet USB-minne som du sätter in kryptovalutorna på. Så det är väl det mest säkra sättet liksom. Och då är det som sagt en liten sån här sticka då. Men det kan vara lite bökigt med det om man inte är så tekniskt kunnig och sånt, så då skulle jag väl säga att använda bra kryptoplattform. Fast man brukar säga där, not your keys. Jag kommer inte ihåg vad man säger. Men om du har dem på en exchange så kan det vara lite högre risk då, ifall att den blir hackad, typ som Mt. Gox blev hackat back in the days. Så ta ut dem, kanske ha dem på en mjukvara som har bra security eller någonting. Snart kommer du få 50k subs när du pratar engelska. Det verkar ju inte som det, med tanke på hur lite folk det var som kollade nu jämfört med förra gången. Men så är det ju. Det är ju förståeligt. Det är ju lite komplext ämne med krypto såklart. Senast om Sinch. Ja du, jag har faktiskt ingen koll på Sinch mer än att de hade rapport här om veckan. Ska se. Och det studsade ju upp ganska bra efter rapporten där. Och då var det vissa snacka om att de hade liksom bra kassaflöde och sådana grejer. På Börsdata, som också är en samarbetspartner, så kan man ju kolla det lite lättare. Och här då så kan man ju få en ganska bra överblick över hur det ser ut. Jag har inte kikat så nära på dem så jag har ingen vidare bra koll. Ska vi bara svepa över mig till högersidan. Och så ska vi flytta på den där grejen så jag ser någonting. Så ja, tillväxten är väl inte jättefin likt förr då. Men vad man kikade på mest var ju kassaflödet då. Och där har vi kan vi få upp ett fritt kassaflöde kanske? Och den där stökar ju till det lite grann. Men ja, positivt kassaflöde i alla fall, vilket är bra för folk som ville se det. Men jag håller mig på läktaren fortfarande kring Sinch. Marcus, du har flera gånger avrått oss från att investera i krypto. Hur kommer det sig denna vändning? Vänder kappan efter vinden med andra ord. Men jag säger ju det, att om du inte har koll på krypto så ska du inte köpa det. Utan det är ju för de som är insatta. Men jag måste ju också kunna få prata om vad jag gör. Och jag har ju krypto och har ägt krypto sedan år 2017. Och nu är det ökat intresse bland krypto och då så pratar jag om det. Och jag tycker det här är ett jättebra sätt för folk att få lära sig mer om produkten, till exempel Bitcoin XBT. Jag kan få betalt för det och ni kan få prata med dem som faktiskt sköter produkterna då. Och det är inte så vanligt att man faktiskt får reda på sådana insights direkt ifrån personerna. Så är det så att du känner att du inte är så sugen på krypto, så köp det inte bara. Och det här är absolut inte ett råd att köpa krypto bara för att jag har pratat med dem. Utan det var mer att de ville förklara hur produkten fungerar då. Grym börsdag i tisdags för många, skriver Tegelsten. Jajamän, fastigheter fick ju en rejäl studs här sedan en vecka tillbaks. Och tittar vi på historiken så ser vi här att det var rejäla uppgångar i breda hela fastighetssektorn då. Castellum plus 11 på 6 månader plus 22. Balder är nu plus 50% 6 månader och 24% på en månad. Så ja, det var skönt att få en liten uppstuds här nu. Det var ju trevligt. Och jag vet att många som följer mig har snackat om att de äger plus fastigheter. Den fastighetsfonden då, som även jag har då. Och den gick upp 10% efter tisdagen. Så det var ju jäkligt kul att se faktiskt. Så vi får väl se ifall det blir någon rekyl upp här nu då. Efter inflationssiffrorna. Hur är Coinbase säkerhetsmässigt tycker du, säger Kat? Jag tycker att Coinbase känns väldigt trygga. Det var ju en av de första i princip plattformarna då. Och de är även börsnoterade, så jag är nog ganska säker på att de har en väldigt hög säkerhet jämfört med andra. Men som man brukar säga då, not your keys, not your coins, så tror jag man säger. Så länge de ligger på en exchange så ska man tänka på att då tar man den risken att ifall det blir hackat eller de gör något trubbel som FTX och liknande, så tar man ju en stor risk då att pengarna kan helt försvinna. Så för att vara 100% säker på en krypto så ska man ju ha dem på en egen wallet då. Hur ser din portfölj ut? Min bolagsportfölj ser ut så här i dagsläget. Och där är det ju då Investor i topp, Castellum, Lundbergs. Och sen så har jag lite fonder. Och det ser ganska likt ut i min privata portfölj med. Där är jag lite tyngre i Castellum. Sen är det Investor, Lundbergs, Evolution, stora innehav. Sen har vi Svedbergs, Duni, Attraction, Saveland, Nivica, Mag Interactive, ett gäng då. Hur tänker du om att köpa krypto nu eller nästa år? Jag har en liten teori om att jag tror att krypto tenderar ju precis som 2018 att gå upp när det blir halvering, och nu är det också vintertider och jul på gång. Är det så att vi ser att räntorna behålls oförändrade eller kommer ner till och med, så kan det nog säkert bli ett rally i krypto då. Men man får ju tänka på och glöm inte bort att ta hem vinst i krypto då. Så hade jag köpt nu så hade jag snittat in mig. Inte liksom gått all in då. Utan väldigt lite. Och som jag sa i diversifiera-videon, max 5-10% av krypto då. Har en fråga om dina fonder. Jag ser att du äger många fonder som är liknande. Blir det inte lite för mycket kaka på kaka? Inte för att det är dåligt, men jo, det kan vara dåligt, absolut. Och jag håller helt med dig om det. Min privata portfölj har bara varit för lat med att göra i ordning. I den här portföljen så har jag däremot, det är Avanza Sverige och Avanza Sera som är lite lika. Men de är viktade på olika sätt. Så därför så har de ganska olika utveckling då. Som vi jämför till exempel Avanza Sverige och Avanza Zero utvecklingsmässigt, så ser vi att Zero har gått mycket bättre. Så att när verkstad och smala liksom index går bättre, till exempel bank som vi har sett nu då går ju Zero bättre. Sen den här får ju mer påverkan utav småbolagen eftersom att den har mer liksom lika viktning. Så den här om småbolagen börjar gå bra så kommer den här fonden att gå bättre. Så jag har skrivit en liten guide om Avanza Sverige på Spara Cash också. Så om man vill gå in och läsa mer om just den fonden och hur den påverkas, så kan man gå in på den här artikeln, Avanza Sverige, ny Sverigefond från Avanza. Så där berättar jag lite om vad jag tycker och tänker om den här fonden och varför den är intressant, och typ jag tror att jag har lite så här nackdelar också. Ja, precis, lite åsikter här då. Så då kan man gå in och läsa den. Men ja, generellt så, jag brukar säga max 3-5 fonder. Jag tror min privata portfölj har 11 fonder. Så ja, så det kan vara lite kaka på kaka. Tanken om Protector. Protector försäkring, när jag började investera så var det väldigt håsat faktiskt, Protector försäkring. Och det är ju en aktie som har gått bra senaste tiden. Jag vet att när jag började investera 2013-14 här, då gick den också upp ganska mycket och sen så blev det platt fall, jag vet inte varför. Men nu har det ju varit en riktigt sjuk resa. Men jag är på tok för dåligt insatt i liksom hur försäkringsbolag fungerar och sånt. Så att det är ingenting för mig tyvärr. Så ja, jag vet inte vad jag ska säga om dem. You mad 'cause you bad. Känns som att Bitcoin kommer tappa lite snart, men omöjligt att veta. Ja, det är jättesvårt och det är därför jag säger det till folk som inte har koll eller inte känner att de vågar ta risk. Köp inte krypto för att det är liksom extremt volatilt. Utan köp bara om du känner att så här, ja, men det är någon teknik som jag ändå tror på sikt. Och att du har lite pengar över som du är villig att riskera liksom. Men se det som pengar i papperskorgen skulle jag säga. För att det kan ju vara så att du, likt vad jag gjorde, jag hoppade in 2018 någonstans, första piken här. Runt 10 000 dollar tror jag. Och sen så gick det ju upp och sen så gick det ner igen. Men sen höll jag mig kvar, var med förra piken också. Och en teori som jag har, det är ju att krypto kommer komma och gå liksom. Att det kommer komma sådana här perioder där vi har bullruns och sen så har vi riktiga sättningar. Så man får vara med på 50% ner ifall det är så att man tajmar fel i Bitcoin liksom. Kent, äntligen lite östgötasnack från Peking. Ja du, jag är ju inte Norrköpingsbo i grunden, men det har smittat av sig så att det har blivit mer östgötska med tiden va. Okej, nu är klockan 7. När är det vi brukar köra giveaways annars? Ja, vi kan köra om ett tag. Kanske när vi får in lite likes. Vad kollar du på främst när du tar in en aktie i portföljen? P-tal, omsättning, vinst, kassaflöde. Jättebra fråga. Det där är olika från bolag till bolag. När det var 2021, 2020, då kollade man inte så mycket på P-tal. Lex, Sinch, Hexatronic och så vidare. Då kollade jag mest på tillväxt, men nu börjar jag kolla mycket mer på värdering då. Så om vi ska ta ett exempel då som vi kan ta Duni som har blivit ett större innehav i min privata portfölj. Ofta så blir jag lite inspirerad av dem som jag följer på Twitter och sådär med då. Men här ser vi om vi kan få fram ska vi få fram ett P-tal kanske? Så har ju Duni, nu ska vi se om vi kollar rullande 12, 5-årsgrafen, P-talet. Här då, historiskt legat på runt liksom P20 sådär. Ja, lite över 20 faktiskt 2022 där, medan den nu då är nere på liksom 13 i P. Och då är det ändå så att de har rekordhöga vinster och marginalen har väl ökat. Så här är ett intressant case. Men även Svedberg som är i en liten ganska tuff position. Det är lite så här kapinnehav där. De har ju misstänks få det tufft då, på grund av det är ju bygg. Alltså det är ju liksom beroende av att bygg går bra. Nu stänger vi av Bitcoin-tollen. Men är det så när de verkar ju ha lyckats klara sig ganska bra, men de har ju också gjort förvärv, Roper Roads i UK, och sen så är det väl på väg ett till förvärv i Holland tror jag att det var. Så de handlar sig till P7 just nu då, men om det är så att vinsten faller såklart så kommer ju då kommer det inte vara P7 längre, då skulle det kunna vara P9 till exempel, P10. Men P10 är fortfarande ganska billigt. Men jag gillar att kolla på att det är en stabil tillväxt, att marginalerna är på väg uppåt, att kassaflödet ser bra ut. Jag är inte jättebra på att analysera kassaflöde, men helst att det är ett rimligt P-tal, att de har en fin tillväxt liksom, och att de gör vinst såklart. Det är typ 3 stycken nycklar. Tack så mycket Abbo, vad skönt att du uppskattade mitt ärliga svar där. Det är det som jag försöker att driva den här kanalen med, ärlighet och transparens. För att det är trots allt våra pengar som det handlar om. Investerar du i andra tillgångar som klockor, fastigheter och så vidare? Nej, jag har en lyxklocka för 200 spänn från Xiaomi tror jag det är, som jag köpte från webbhallen för 200 spänn för många år sedan. Det är en jävligt bra investering alltså. Den har inte ökat i värde kanske, men den har hållit och jag kan bada i saltvatten med den och sitta i en bubbelpool och den funkar fortfarande. Fastigheter, nej, jag har väldigt mycket fastigheter i portföljen däremot. Så det är väl så, men annars så är det ju peer-to-peer-lån, det är kryptovalutor, jag har lite cash på sparkonto, men sen är ju också mitt företag en tillgång, som till exempel att ni sitter och tittar på min stream, det är ju en extremt fin tillgång för mig, som genererar pengar till mig, som gör att jag kan ta ut lön och fortsätta liksom, ja, ha det här som en hobby, så jag är väldigt tacksam till er som tittar. Så. Hur mycket pengar har du i privata? Det finns en anledning till att jag har slutat och visa min privata. Men det är mer än vad det är i min bolagsportfölj, jag kan väl säga så. Och är man lite quick math av sig så kan man kolla på mina månadsgenomgångar och räkna baklänges, så är det inte så svårt att komma fram till det. Är botten nådd med fastighetsaktierna? Ja, det är en jäkligt bra fråga. Jag skulle nog tro att många utav antingen är det så här, det kommer komma en lite djupare botten på fastigheter, eller så har vi gått förbi botten, det tror jag. Och vi har ju många fastigheter som har gjort till exempel nyemissioner. Jag har ju en liten slatt, alltså typ en tusenlapp bara i det här skitbolaget Nivika. Det är ett småländskt litet bolag, de gör ju nyemission nu, som jag inte hunnit att läsa på än. Och Castellum till exempel tog ju in 10 miljarder tror jag att det var i nyemission. Vi har Corem säljer av massa, SBB är ju kaos i. Så att, jag vet inte. Frågan är ju vart räntorna är på väg. Är räntorna på väg ner? Ja, då är botten nådd. Är räntorna på väg upp? Då är den inte nådd liksom. Det är typ så jag resonerar. Tror du räntorna höjs? Nej, jag tror faktiskt inte det. Inte i dagsläget, men kanske en höjning till i Sverige. Och sen så tror jag att det kommer vara flat eller gå ner. Nu ser jag att det rasslar in frågor här i chatten då, så att jag ska försöka beta av så många som möjligt. Men som jag påminner om, jag hinner inte svara på allt, utan jag tar dem för att kunna vara up to date. Vad tycker du om courtaget är så högt i kryptocertifikat? Bättre att köpa in för några tusenlappar per gång då. Köper man till exempel aktier är det 600 kronor i ett courtage. Ja, men nej, så är det ju. Tyvärr är det så med certifikat. Och det är ju Avanzas fel. Nej, men så det får du räkna lite på typ vad... Ja, exempelvis här då. Om du ska köpa... Nu ska vi se. Nu kostar den här ganska mycket då. Men vi kommer upp till här 5 stycken i antal, så att ja, minst 7000 är ju bäst om du vill betala så lite som möjligt såklart. Hur mycket bakgrundscheck och research gör du innan du köper en aktie? Det är olika. Det kan vara allt ifrån en vecka till ett halvår liksom. Det finns många bolag som jag haft på bevakningslistan sen jag började med aktier och inte har köpt den liksom. Så att det är jätteolika det där. Lite högre elpriser än, kan man tjäna på det genom någon produkt? Jag tror det. Jag för mig att det finns elcertifikat på Avanza, eller? Elpris. Nej, jag kommer inte ihåg vad den heter, men jag för mig att det finns någon tracker för el eller något sånt. Annars så har du ju energibolag såklart som tjänar pengar på att elpriset går upp då. Men jag är jättedåligt insatt på det, så jag kan inte liksom rekommendera någon tyvärr. Jag äger både AMF småbolag och Spiltan småbolagsfond. Är de lika eller går det bra att äga båda? Jättebra fråga. Jag har också båda. Men jag skulle säga att det går bra att äga båda två, för de är väldigt olika. Och det kan man kolla ganska enkelt på så här. Man går in på fonden och sen så tittar man på innehaven då. Så om vi kollar på innehaven här. Det här är Spiltan småbolagsfond, så tittar vi överst. Vi har Indutrade, Lagerkrans, Adtech, Lifco, AK, Bufab. Och så kollar vi här och då har vi Trelleborg, Beijer, Sweco, Sagax. Så mer fastigheter här i. Du kan också se det på branscherna här då. Till höger, industri 31, fastigheter 17. Här är det inte alls några fastigheter. Så det här är det industri och teknik. Så att ja, jag skulle säga att det går bra att ha båda. Men det är ju så att det tenderar ju att utveckla sig hyfsat liknande ändå. Men ja, jag tycker att det går bra med båda. Sibek vet jag inte vad det är tyvärr. Giveaway alltid 23.00. Are you kidding me? Nej du, 23.00 det orkar jag inte sitta här till. Måste jag hem någon gång. Vilken är den senaste riktiga rapportsmällen du gick på, frågar Lasse. Bra fråga. Det borde nästan ni veta mer än mig. Waystream har man ju fått åka på en del smällar. Ja, vad är det mer då? Hexatronic, men jag gick ur dem för ett tag sedan. Så jag kommer inte riktigt ihåg. Men jag tror att det är Waystream som är värsta rapportsmällen då. Evolution gick väl ner också på rapport. Så den fick man ju nytt. Men den har ju rekulerat upp lite nu då. Du borde göra en live med Jesper Sarri. Han är intressant. Ja, Jesper Sarri är asskön alltså. Vi brukar DMa ibland. Så att, skriv till honom på hans videos. Han är ju lite bättre än mig på att lägga ut videos nu. Så skriv det. Var med i Spara Cash livestream så ska vi se till att få med honom. Och han får jättegärna hoppa in. Han är alltid välkommen. Vilken är din drömgäst i liven? Drömgäst är svårt att säga. Men en gäst som jag gärna hade velat träffa och prata med, det är Ilja Batljan. Han verkar väldigt intressant. Och speciellt nu när typ ingen får prata med han. Eller han pratar inte med någon media. Då hade jag väldigt gärna velat ha med honom. Men sen finns det ju andra liksom, drömgäster som... Ja, vilka kan det vara? Men börs-vd:ar. Hade jättegärna velat ha med Technion-vd:n Johan Stene tror jag han heter. Hade också varit trevlig. Och sen olika typ daytraders på Twitter. Eka Lundin hade varit kul att ha med. Niklas Andersson såklart. Finns massor. Vad tror du om MPC Container? Tyvärr ingen aning. Saffa, jag är inte så insatt i fastighetsaktier. Men vilken fastighetsaktie har lägst skulder och är mest stabil att investera i just nu? Ja, jättebra fråga. Vi kan göra så, jag slänger upp den här med. Börspodden är ju så snälla, eller Börspodden. Börsdata är så snälla att sponsra mig. Och de har ett erbjudande, så om man köper 12 månader så får man 2 månader extra. Och sen så är det bara att mejla dem och säga det att man kommer ifrån Sparcash Livestream. Men de har en jättebra funktion där man på strategier kan gå på, nu ska vi se, branscher, nu ska vi se, på screenern är det ju. Screener och sen lägger man till nyckeltal. Och sen så här uppe så kan man klicka branschnyckeltal. Och sen så kan man trycka på belåningsgrad fastigheter. Väljer man den, då får man en lista. Och sen så får man poäng på dem, har jag för mig. Nu ska vi se, nu har vi Magic Rank här. Ta bort Magic Rank. Och sen så ska vi ha belåningsgrad fastigheter. Och sen måste vi ju såklart välja bransch. Avmarkera alla, finans. Och sen väljer vi fastighetsbolag, uppdatera. Så då får vi fram lite fastighetsaktier här då. Ska jag flytta över mig till höger såklart så ni ser någonting. Och då så får du liksom rakt på sak här vilka fastighetsbolag som har lägst belåningsgrad. Och då är det ju huvudstaden där i topp. Ägs utav Lundbergs 20%. Så de är ju kända för, Fredrik Lundberg är ju känd för att ha en väldigt låg risk. I form av belåning och sånt. Och han är väl den som har varit mest chill med det. Så ja, det är huvudstaden. Linkprop vet jag inte. Catena, Castellum kommit ner lite. Fast partner, ja. Och scrollar vi ner lite, över 50 känns det lite ostabilt. Så där har vi ju SBB, Corem som håller på och säljer i fulla muggar. Cibus dyker upp här med, det är lite oroväckande. Det sitter jag också på. Men det är ett ganska enkelt sätt helt enkelt att få en bra koll då på vilka fastighetsaktier som har låg belåning i alla fall. Sen så Så vet inte jag vilka som är stabila eller positiva eller bästa. Vilken börspodd lyssnar du på om du lyssnar på podd? Frågar jag Tegelsten. Ja, jättebra fråga. Ofta så brukar jag lyssna på Market Makers, Börspodden har jag börjat lyssna på igen. Jag har lyssnat på Aktiesnack tror jag den heter. Sen har jag börjat lyssna lite på den här gäddan och hästen. Nej, men det är väl han gädda på aktiespararna, unga aktiespararna. Det finns säkert fler poddar som jag Finansfokus lyssnar på ibland. Men det är typ de som jag lyssnar mest på då. Sen så har jag ju väldigt nära till jobbet så jag hinner typ inte lyssna på så mycket podd. Det tar ju liksom en vecka för mig att lyssna färdigt ett avsnitt. Lundbergsföretagen riktigt stabilt. Ja, det är en ganska trygg investering känner väl jag i dagsläget i alla fall. Som jag har börjat att vikta in mig ganska mycket för att basa upp portföljen. Stefan Rydén, drömresemål. Ja, vilken härlig fråga. Ja, jag har ju varit en hel del länder, men en drömresemål, alltså ett mål jag har med att resa är ju till USA skulle jag vilja se och sen central Sydamerika. Sen så Australien har jag varit i, men det är ju också väldigt drömmigt. Skulle vilja se kanske, ja men man vill ju se typ de här Maldiverna och sådana här ställen liksom, men jag känner att jag kommer bli uttråkad efter typ en vecka. Så att jag skippar dem. Men ja, det är väl ett gäng liksom. Ja, vad säger ni? Jag börjar bli lite trött här med käften, så vi kanske ska köra giveawayn direkt då. Om vi kan få lite likes till. Eller 100 pers nästan som tittar. Vi kan väl komma över 50 likes i alla fall. 45 är vi på nu. Och sen så kan vi köra giveawayn då. Hampus Stenman, daglig handel för Spiltan Invest. Kommer de få rabatt eller premie? Fin historik och bra ledning och så vidare. Jag köper gärna till nuvarande 24% rabatt. Jättebra fråga Hampus. Spiltan har ju länge haft en ganska ordentlig rabatt. Men nu har den börjat komma upp lite. Om vi tittar på här då. Så ser vi hur länge den har legat i substansrabatt. Handlas i dagsläget till rabatt om 24% jag beräknad. Och jag tror ju efter att när de noteras om så lär det väl gå mer åt premiehållet än rabatt då. Men jag tycker väl att med den stora exponeringen man har emot Paradox så bör det nog vara en rabatt på aktien tycker jag. Det är ju väldigt tungt, nästan 50% Paradox nu då. Boom! 54 likes redan, snyggt, tack så mycket för ni. Nu kör vi. Tack skriver Bodil. Hej på dig Bodil, snart ses vi, jag ska ju ner. För den som inte vet, om någon är från Skåne så får man jättegärna signa upp på vår föreläsning 22 november. Då får man gå in på Aktiespararna och kika. Och bor man i Norrköping så kan man komma till min föreläsning 21 november på Aktiespararna där med då. Men ja, vad säger ni? Välkommen skriver de här, härligt. Ja, det ska bli kul. Så men vi hoppar väl in på den här giveawayn nu då. Och sen så tycker jag tid kvar tills vi avslutar giveawayn. Vi sätter en ganska kort timer nu då, så att det blir stor chans för er att vinna boken. End time, vi sätter 19 och vad säger vi? 19:20 så att det blir mindre än 5 minuter. Så jag lägger ut länken någonstans i chatten har jag för mig. Och så ska vi se, så är det bara att scanna den där QR-koden där uppe om man har tittat på mig på en skärm. Ska vi se, vad har vi den länken nu då? Där har vi den. Och sen så vill jag ha lite musik som vanligt, eller hur? Lite cash först. Boom! Och sen lite funk får det bli först. Sådär då. Det finns några platser kvar den 22 november, skriver Bodil. Superbra. Då får vi hoppas att vi fyller upp dem. Tack för en intressant stund, skriver Facebook-user. Tack själv. Hoppa över till YouTube så får jag veta vem det är som kommenterar. Neosime skriver, vänta har jag missat något? Ska Spiltan omnoteras? Ja. Spiltan ska byta börs. Ska se om vi kan sänka den här musiken lite. Ni får säga till om musiken är för hög. 3 minuter har ni på er, så nu får ni skynda er på. Ska vi se om vi kan pinna den här. Så nu ligger en länk till giveawayn pinnad i chatten och ni får säga till om det inte funkar. Jag ser att det kommer in lite responses här nu. Bodil ska vara med. Har inte du en sån bok redan? Nej, jag skojar bara. Klart du ska ha en bok. Ja men bra, det rullar in lite responses. Så om drygt 3 minuter så avslutar vi giveawayn och sen så lottar vi ut lite böcker. Back to your question, Neosim. De ska ju byta till till NGM, en annan lista som handlas varje dag då. Så ja. Jo, men det kan bli en bra julklapp till någon. Ja, det har du rätt i. När går du live igen? Jag går live igen om 2 veckor tror jag. Jag har inte kollat min kalender än, men varannan torsdag 17:30 är det ju. Så det blir torsdag 30 november som det ser ut just nu, 17:30. Och är det någonting som dyker upp innan dess, då kan det vara så att jag ibland kör en spontanare. Jag är med, skriver Nils. Härligt. Härligt. Det rasslar in lite responses. Superbra. Men den här gången kör vi faktiskt bara 3 böcker. Förra gången körde jag liksom 8 böcker. Då var det 6 på YouTube, 2 på Instagram. Och det finns ju faktiskt en tävling på Instagram med. Så vill man ha dubbel chans så får man gå in på min Instagram @sparacash. Och sen så är det bara att kolla mitt näst senaste inlägg tror jag det. 1 minut kvar då. Ska vi se ifall det kommer in några fler frågor under tiden. Vinner jag en bok så bjuder jag på kebabpizza i Jönköping. Ja, det är Jönköpings Nisse. Får hoppas att du vinner. Det jobbiga är, om du vinner så kommer folk bara, nej det är riggat. Du borde starta ett bokförlag som översätter alla bra aktieböcker som inte finns på svenska. Ja, det är sant, en bra idé faktiskt. Stefan, jag är inne, härligt. Snyggt jobbat. Boom. 20:07. Idag har jag varit på kontoret sedan klockan 8, så det blir 11 timmar här nu då. Börjar få lite så här lite ont i där bak. Saffa, det känns som att du verkligen trivs i ditt arbete med YouTube, Sparcash och så vidare. Jag är glad för din skull och bra kämpat, du har kommit långt. Tack så mycket Saffa. Men det är sjukt roligt för att det är ju tack vare er som man orkar fortsätta med det. Jag har haft lite formsvacka nu när det kommer till liksom skapa videos och sånt. Och det är för att jag tyvärr tar på mig för mycket. Jag säger ja till för mycket grejer. Det leder till att jag inte hinner att göra videos. Men jag har fixat en bra klippare. Om man kollade på diversifiera-videon så är det Rickard som är en jätteduktig filmare och klippare som hjälpte mig med den. Så vi ska försöka få loss lite fler videos. Men ja, jag är jätteglad att jag får det här att funka och kan leva på det. Tråkigt för Isamba, ja. Hon ligger hemma och gråter nu och väntar på mig. Så hon lär ju inte kolla på den här heller tyvärr. Ja, men nu är giveawayn slut då. Så jag vet inte om vi ska vänta. Det har kommit in ett gäng. Det ser ut att vara väldigt hög chans för folk att vinna i alla fall. Och sen så tänker jag att jag måste kolla nu så att det inte är någon som har vunnit innan. För då tycker jag att det blir lite fusk. Man vill ju gärna att folk som inte har vunnit innan ska få en chans att vinna. Eller vad säger ni? Jag ska bara kolla det för säkerhets skull. Jag tycker det är så tråkigt när folk vinner hur många böcker som helst. Där vann de och de vann och de vann och den vann. Där ja, har vi dem. Ska vi se. Ja men kul. Jag tror att vi klarar oss hyfsat bra idag. Nu ska vi se, skriv ditt namn du har på YouTube. Superbra, där har vi några sådana. Får vi se, kommer det in någon mer? Nej. Då ska vi ta och stänga den här nu då. Har vi någon mer fråga eller? Blir det eftersnack i Discord? Ja. Så är det så att man vill prata lite med mig så kommer jag hoppa in där på vägen hem. Sen hemma kan jag inte lova att jag sitter en halvtimme, men en kvart kommer ni ha med mig på Discord i alla fall. Så se till att hoppa in där. Finns en länk i beskrivningen. Då stänger vi giveaway nu då. Dra 4 böcker istället. Jag är med varje gång men jag vinner aldrig. Ja, men vi håller tummarna för dig Emil. Men nu börjar mina böcker ta slut här så att jag kan inte skicka iväg 10 böcker varje gång för då kommer det bara bli ett par giveaways till. Jag vill gärna att de ska överleva lite längre. View in sheets. Så där, nu har vi stängt den här kära giveawayen och så ska vi ta dem och gå in på wheel decide. Så. Och sen ska vi få in dem i listan. Paste list. Där har vi den. Add choices. Apply. Ser vi dem? Ja, det gör vi. Vad bra. Då ska vi dra över dem hit. Så. Och så ska vi byta skärm. Dit. Yes, det funkar. Jag regga tävlingen? Jag vet inte. Men det ser ut som att det står AV i hjulet. Så att det verkar så, ja. Snablar, jag ser ut att ha missat starten på denna live. Prenumerera nu så hoppas det plingar till nästa gång. Kung! Tack så mycket för subben. Det är bara att kolla om sen. Då ska vi se, okej. Då vill vi ha lite spänningsmusik va? Vi har ju alltså 3 böcker så det är ganska hög chans för er idag att vinna. Vad har vi nyhetsjingeln där? Där har vi den. Okej. Är ni med nu då? Ni ska ju vara med i chatten och stoppa mig. Så ja. Nu snurrar vi hjulet. Första boken. Vem går första boken till? Skriv stopp i chatten. David S. Skriver stopp. Och första boken går till Robin Andersson. Grattis, du har vunnit. Nu måste jag bara skriva upp det i mitt ark så jag vet. Robin Andersson, första. Var är du? Där har vi Robin. Perfekt. Stopp i chatten skriver Kim. Ja, snyggt. Okej, nu har vi en bok till. Jag behöver inte ta fram alla böcker. Vem vinner nästa bok då? Skulle vi ta bort Robin här med så att han där, så apply. Nej, vad fan är det här då? Database connection. Okej, om Robin vinner så spinnar vi igen. Grattis Robin. Chatten, är ni med? Nu kör vi ett varv till då. Får vi ett stopp. Kom igen då. Kom igen. Kom igen. Där. David S har bra internetuppkoppling för han är alltid först. Another cup of tea. Grattis. Du har vunnit en aktiebok. Ska vi se om vi hittar another cup of tea. Där hittar vi another cup of tea. Och den sista då. Den sista boken. Och är det så att du inte vinner så gå in på Instagram och var med där. För där finns det en andra chans på min post. Kung skriver Robin Andersson. Härligt. Okej. Sista chansen. Skriv stopp. Eller någonting. Riggat såklart. Kom igen nu då. Stopp skriver Kapten Panna. Den vinner sista boken. George Albskär. Grattis till dig som har vunnit en aktiebok. Snyggt. Ja, bra jobbat kära vänner. Nu har jag snart varit igång i 2 timmar på tok för länge. Jag kommer att skicka de här böckerna till er om ni har skrivit rätt adress. Annars så går turen över till någon annan. Men ja, med det sagt så får jag tacka er för den här kvällen. Och häng på in i Discord vet jag. Så snackar vi lite där. Ha det så gött så ses vi i nästa livestream. Perfekt nu när den avslutas den här ingen. Tack, ha det gött. Hej, ciao!